In part 2 of this story, the tension in the kitchen reached a boiling point as Mrs. Remy's voice, filled with disappointment, clashed with Yusuf's passionate defense. The argument over Adesewa's perceived failure to meet family expectations intensified, their conflicting values and pressures laid bare. The atmosphere crackled with unresolved emotions and hurtful accusations. Can this confrontation tear the family apart? Adesewa's fate now seemed inextricably tied to their unresolved discord. The moment held a promise of transformative resolution, but the path forward remained uncertain. Would this pivotal confrontation lead to understanding and healing, or deepen the rift that had been laid bare? The unfolding drama held the potential to reshape their family dynamics forever. Mrs. Remy's eyes narrowed as she met her son's gaze. I'm saying that she didn't take this seriously enough. It's not just about following a recipe, it's about understanding and embodying our family's values. This isn't something that can be taken lightly. Yusuf's anger flared as he tried to make his mother see his perspective. Mother, you can't expect everyone to be perfect right away. Adesewa is trying her best. She made an effort, and that should count for something. The argument escalated as Mrs. Remy's voice grew louder. Effort isn't always enough, Yusuf. There are standards and expectations that must be met. Adesewa didn't meet them. It's as simple as that. Yusuf's voice was filled with hurt and frustration as he shot back, and what about the pressure you put on her? You set her up for failure, and now you're blaming her for not meeting unrealistic expectations. The emotional clash between mother and son was intense, each side standing firm in their beliefs. The conversation became a battleground of conflicting values and unmet expectations. Yusuf's desire to support Adesewa and his frustration with his mother's rigid standards clashed with Mrs. Remy's insistence on maintaining traditional standards and expectations. As the argument reached its peak, the kitchen door creaked open, and Adesewa peeked in, her eyes filled with apprehension. The sight of the ongoing confrontation made her heart ache. She felt like a pawn in a conflict that was far beyond her control. Her attempts to show respect and understanding had seemingly failed, and the situation had escalated into a full-blown argument. Seeing Adesewa's distressed expression, Yusuf's anger began to subside, replaced by a deep sadness. He sighed heavily and turned to his mother, his voice softer but still laden with frustration. Mother, I understand that you have high standards, but we need to be compassionate. Adesewa is trying her best, and we need to support her, not tear her down. Mrs. Remy's face softened slightly, though the tension was still evident. I just want what's best for this family, Yusuf. It's not easy for me to see something so important not being done right. The emotional weight of the conversation lingered in the room, casting a shadow over the once hopeful afternoon. The clash of perspectives had created a rift, leaving everyone feeling the strain of unmet expectations and strained relationships. The conversation eventually petered out, leaving Yusuf and Mrs. Remy in a fraught silence. The air was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved conflict. Adesewa, standing at the edge of the room, felt a deep sense of helplessness as she witnessed the emotional turmoil unfold. In the aftermath of the confrontation, The atmosphere in the house was strained and uneasy. The kitchen, now devoid of the earlier chaos, seemed to echo the unresolved tension that lingered between Yusuf and his mother. Adesewa's heart ached as she tried to make sense of the situation, her efforts to please and honor the family's traditions seemingly overshadowed by the conflict. Yusuf's support for Adesewa was unwavering, but it came at a cost. His relationship with his mother was strained, and the emotional rift was palpable. The challenge that had begun with hopeful intentions had ended in a clash of values and expectations. As the days passed, the wounds of the confrontation began to heal, though the scars of the argument remained. Yusuf and Mrs. Remy worked through their differences, their conversations more measured and thoughtful. Adesewa, too, found a new understanding of the complexities of blending her own values with the expectations of her partner's family. The aftermath of the cooking disaster left Yusuf in a state of deep emotional turmoil. The once clear lines between his love for Adesewa and his loyalty to his mother were now blurred, creating an internal struggle that he found difficult to navigate. His usual confidence was undermined by a storm of conflicting emotions. Yusuf sat in the dimly lit living room of their apartment, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fireplace. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the coldness in his heart. He was alone with his thoughts, replaying the events of the day in his mind. The discord between his mother and Adesewa had left him feeling trapped between two worlds, one defined by tradition and the other by love. His love for Adesewa was undeniable. She was kind, supportive, and had made an honest effort to embrace his family's traditions. Yet, the disaster in the kitchen had revealed a chasm between their worlds, one that had become painfully evident in the wake of Mrs. Remy's disapproval. Yusuf was deeply troubled by his mother's reaction, which had been harsh and unforgiving. He had never anticipated that a simple cooking challenge could evolve into such a significant point of contention. Yusuf's loyalty to his mother was also unwavering. She had been a constant source of guidance and support throughout his life. Her expectations, though rigid, came from a place of love and a desire to maintain the family's legacy. Yusuf knew that his mother's standards were high and that her disappointment was not a reflection of a lack of love but rather an expression of her deep-seated values. The internal conflict was exacerbated by his sense of responsibility. He had hoped that Adesewa's attempt to cook for his family would be a bridge between their different worlds. Instead, it had become a battleground for conflicting expectations. Yusuf felt guilty for putting Adesewa in such a challenging position and equally guilty for not meeting his mother's expectations. Unable to find a resolution on his own, Yusuf decided to confide in his friend Lawal. Lawal had been a steadfast friend through many of Yusuf's ups and downs, and Yusuf hoped that his perspective could provide some clarity. Yusuf met Lawal at their favorite coffee shop, a cozy spot with comfortable armchairs and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Lawal was already seated when Yusuf arrived, his easy demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil Yusuf felt inside. After exchanging pleasantries, Yusuf wasted no time diving into the heart of his dilemma. Lawal, I don't know what to do, Yusuf began, his voice tinged with frustration. The cooking disaster at home has created this huge rift between Adesewa and my mother. I'm torn between my love for Adesewa and my loyalty to my family. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle, and I don't know how to bridge the gap. Lawal's expression grew serious as he listened to Yusuf's recounting of the events. After a moment of contemplation, Lawal leaned forward, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "Yusuf, I can see why you're struggling. It's never easy to balance love and family expectations, especially when they clash so dramatically. But let's break it down a bit." Yusuf took a sip of his coffee, appreciating the warmth but unable to fully enjoy it. He nodded, urging Lawal to continue. "First, consider this," Lawal said. "Your love for Adesewa is important, and so is your relationship with your mother. Both are significant parts of your life, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. The challenge here is finding a way to reconcile these two aspects without compromising either." Yusuf sighed heavily. "I know that logically, but it feels like every time I try to make things right, it just makes it worse. My mother's expectations are so high, and Adesewa's efforts don't seem to meet them. I don't want to choose between them, but it feels like that's where I'm headed." Lawal's eyes softened with empathy. "It's understandable to feel that way. But remember, you don't have to choose one over the other. It's about finding a balance and setting realistic expectations for both sides. Adesewa's effort should be appreciated, and your mother's values should be respected. Both are valid." Yusuf nodded slowly, taking in Lawal's words. "But how do I make my mother understand that Adesewa's efforts are genuine? She's not perfect, but she's trying. I don't want to feel like I'm constantly defending her." Lawal leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes, it's about communication and time. Your mother may need to see Adesewa's genuine commitment to understand her efforts better. It might take more than one meal or one conversation. It could be a series of small steps that show Adesewa's respect for the family's traditions." Yusuf's brow furrowed as he considered this. "And what about my own role in all this? I feel like I'm constantly caught in the middle, trying to mediate between the two." Lawal nodded. "You are in a tough spot, but it's crucial to establish boundaries and communicate openly. Let both Adesewa and your mother know where you stand and what you need from them. Encourage Adesewa to learn about the traditions at her own pace and support her efforts. At the same time, have an honest conversation with your mother about the importance of understanding and patience." Yusuf felt a glimmer of hope as he listened to Lawal's advice. It was clear that finding a resolution would require patience and effort from all sides. He needed to be a bridge between Adesewa and his mother, and that meant advocating for understanding and compromise. "Thanks, Lawal," Yusuf said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I really needed this perspective. I think I've been so wrapped up in the immediate conflict that I forgot to see the bigger picture." Lawal smiled warmly. "That's what friends are for. Just remember, it's a process. Building bridges takes time, but with patience and communication, it's possible to find a way forward." As Yusuf left the coffee shop, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Lawal's advice had provided him with a clearer direction. He knew that resolving the conflict between Adesewa and his mother would require effort, but he was willing to take on the challenge. His love for Adesewa and his respect for his mother could coexist, and it was up to him to find the balance between them. The conversation with Lawal had been a pivotal moment for Yusuf, offering him both clarity and hope. He understood that navigating this complex situation would not be easy, but with empathy, communication, and a willingness to bridge the gap, he was prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Yusuf put Lawal's advice into action. He began by having honest conversations with both Adesewa and his mother, setting clear expectations and fostering understanding. He encouraged Adesewa to continue learning about the family's traditions at her own pace and offered her support and patience. At the same time, he communicated with his mother about the importance of recognizing Adesewa's efforts and extending grace. The process was gradual, with small victories and setbacks along the way. Yusuf's role as a mediator required him to remain patient and empathetic, but he was committed to finding a resolution that honored both his love for Adesewa and his respect for his mother. The journey was ongoing, but Yusuf's efforts to balance these two important aspects of his life marked the beginning of a more harmonious understanding. Through persistence and open communication, Yusuf hoped to bridge the gap between his worlds, creating a space where love and tradition could coexist in harmony. The day was overcast, with a thick blanket of gray clouds hanging low in the sky, as though the weather itself was reflecting the heaviness that Yusuf felt. He had spent the morning pacing around his apartment, wrestling with his thoughts. Finally, he had made up his mind he would have to confront his mother again. It was a decision born out of both desperation and hope. Adesewa was important to him, and he needed to find a way to bridge the chasm that had grown between her and his family. With a deep breath, Yusuf drove to his mother's house. The familiar streets of his childhood felt oddly distant today, each turn leading him deeper into his apprehension. When he arrived, he paused at the front door, summoning every ounce of courage he had. The usual warmth of the home felt distant, replaced by a chill that seemed to settle in his bones. He knocked and waited, his heart racing with every second that passed. The door creaked open, and his mother's face appeared, a look of surprise and a hint of irritation crossing her features. "Yusuf," she said, her tone neutral. "What brings you here?" "Hi, Mom," Yusuf replied, forcing a smile. "Can we talk? It's important." His mother hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. The living room, with its neatly arranged furniture and the comforting scent of incense, seemed unchanged. Yet, to Yusuf, it felt like a battleground. They settled into their usual spots, Yusuf on the couch and his mother in her favorite armchair. The silence between them was thick, laden with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Yusuf could feel the weight of his mother's disapproval pressing down on him. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Adesewa," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know things haven't gone well with the cooking, and I understand why you're upset. But she really is trying. She wants to be a part of this family, and she's making an effort." His mother's eyes narrowed, her expression a mixture of disappointment and frustration. Yusuf, it's not just about the cooking. It's about values, traditions. Adesewa's efforts, however sincere, aren't enough to change what's deeply ingrained. Yusuf's heart sank, but he pressed on. I understand that traditions are important, but Adesewa isn't trying to erase them. She's learning, adapting. Isn't there a way we can help her understand and respect our customs rather than pushing her away? His mother's gaze was unwavering. It's not just about respect, Yusuf. It's about the foundation of our family. The way we do things, the way we live, these aren't just customs, they're the essence of who we are. Adesewa's approach, no matter how well-intentioned, doesn't align with that. Yusuf felt a pang of frustration. But isn't love supposed to bring us together? Isn't it worth trying to find a middle ground? I love Adesewa, and I want her in my life. I want us to be a family, but that can't happen if you refuse to accept her. His mother's expression softened momentarily, but her resolve remained firm. Yusuf, love is important, but it shouldn't come at the expense of our values. I've spent my life upholding these traditions, and I can't simply cast them aside. The conversation grew more heated as Yusuf's frustration mounted. I'm not asking you to cast them aside. I'm asking you to see that Adesewa is trying and to give her a chance. She's not the enemy. She's someone who loves me and wants to be a part of our lives. His mother's face hardened, and her voice grew stern. I've given her a chance, and what I've seen so far hasn't convinced me. Adesewa's presence changes things in ways I can't accept. It's not just about the cooking, it's about the future and what it represents. Yusuf's emotions were raw, and he felt his voice quivering. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Give her a chance. Don't let this come between us. I love Adesewa, and I can't bear the thought of losing either you or her. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense, and Yusuf's mother sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a thick fog settling over them. Yusuf's heart was pounding, and he could see the determination in his mother's eyes, a determination that seemed to signal an impending finality. After what felt like an eternity, his mother spoke, her voice cold and resolute. Yusuf, I've thought long and hard about this. I appreciate your passion and your love for Adesewa, but I cannot compromise on this matter. If you choose to continue your relationship with her, you need to understand the consequences. Yusuf's stomach twisted with dread. What do you mean, consequences? His mother's gaze was unwavering. If you insist on pursuing this relationship with Adesewa, you will need to make a choice. You will have to decide whether to stay in this family or to be with her. I cannot support a relationship that disregards our values and traditions. It's not something I can accept or condone. The weight of our words hit Yusuf like a physical blow. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the decision he now faced. The thought of losing his mother's support and the stability of his family life was terrifying, yet the thought of abandoning Adesewa was equally unbearable. Mom, you can't be serious, Yusuf said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're asking me to choose between you and the person I love. How can you ask me to do that?" His mother's expression remained firm, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to choose lightly. This is about the future, about preserving the values that have been part of our family for generations. I've always been clear about what I stand for, and I can't compromise on these principles." Yusuf felt a deep sense of helplessness and despair. The love he had for Adesewa and his commitment to his family had never felt so irreconcilable. He was torn between two worlds, both of which he valued deeply but which now seemed mutually exclusive. "I need time to think," Yusuf said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "I can't make this decision right now." His mother nodded, her expression unreadable. "Take all the time you need. Just understand that the decision you make will have far-reaching consequences. This is not just about you and Adesewa, it's about the future of our family and the legacy we uphold."